All right, Moto Ready here. Welcome again. So the next topic I want to cover is the Goldwing suspension system. So it's somewhat controversial, I would say, right? Some people really like the suspension, but some people, they don't like it and they go for some really expensive upgrades and so on. In my case, the suspension is just fine. I absolutely don't see any reason to upgrade or anything from the stock. It just, works very well for me. So I'll first cover the rear suspension. So the rear suspension is very similar to the previous gen, right? So it is a very traditional setup, and it does offer electronic preload, but you need to actually set it manually from the dash here. I don't know if that was also part of the previous gen. I think it was. So what you do is you can actually go to the home setting here and then go to the vehicle setting, and then you can set your preload. So right now it's just me as a rider, and if you go on a longer trip where you have luggage, then you can set it to rider plus luggage. Then if you have a pillion, you can set it to rider plus pillion, and if you have rider, pillion and luggage, you can set it accordingly. And what happens is when you set it, so and I'm not sure if the cell phone is able to pick it up, but you do hear something happening where it kind of increases the height of the suspension or the height of the bike, and it stiffens up the suspension. So the more the load, the more stiffer the rear suspension would get, and it is really good because it gives you a lot of confidence and stability when you actually get the bike loaded up. So in my case, I don't ride with a pillion. I'm a solo rider, but I do load it up quite heavily from time to time, right? When I go on those really long distance trips, I've put about 19,000 miles on the bike, and many of them were really long distance trips, right? 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, and so on. So I do really load it up, meaning I load up the side saddlebags, I load up the trunk. I do also have a bag that occupies the pillion area. So I do load it up, and when I load it up, I actually set the preload accordingly, and it really helps with the stability of the bike. It gives me a lot of confidence. It stiffens up the suspension, and it works very well from my standpoint. So the next thing I want to quickly cover is the front suspension, right? So the front suspension, as you guys might already know if you're following this motorcycle a little bit, is the front suspension is the complete redesign compared to the previous version. The previous version was a more traditional, front fork. This one is more like a wishbone setup, and and yeah, there are some pros and cons to it, I would say. What I've noticed is, again, your experience with the front suspension in the Goldwing would really also depend on what your experience was with the previous bike that you owned. So in my case, for a very brief period, I had a Kawasaki Versys, and prior to that, I had a Kawasaki Concourse 14 or C14 or GTR 1400 in short for almost like 5 years. And that is a sports touring bike. It's a pretty heavy bike, and it has a more traditional, front fork, inverted front fork, and it's a very robust system, and that will soak up the bumps quite nicely. And so when I first rode the Goldwing, what I noticed was, when it comes to those abrupt bumps, I would actually feel it through the handlebar. And I would not say it's an issue, but it was something that I had to get used to. So that's one thing. The other thing, I think it said that the front suspension does bottom out. Now, I have about 19,000 miles. I don't baby the bike, meaning I do ride the bike in all sorts of road conditions. Of course, I don't take it on purpose on gravel road, but there are times when I've actually had to, go on a stretch of gravel road because, when I came up with the route, I didn't know that there would be gravel road and so on. So I do ride on, those really small country roads where the roads are somewhat sketchy. But I've never really felt the front suspension bottoming out, in my experience at least. But what I can tell you about it is, especially in the freeway in the US, freeway or motorway as it's known in the rest of the world, those old freeways, especially cement freeways, right? Not the tar ones, the cement ones, when you have one block of cement ending and then the other block starting, and when that happens, there is an undulation or there's an abrupt, the flow is not smooth. And when you actually go over that at a slightly lower speed, let's say below 55 miles an hour, that's when you will actually notice the front suspension bottoming out a little bit, and you will actually feel it through the handlebar. But it is dependent on the speed in which you're traveling. So for example, if it's a freeway, right, most often in my case I go at 75 miles an hour. 80 miles an hour is my average. So when you're going at 80 miles an hour, when you just glide through it, you'll really not feel it. It'll just glide through. It is only when you are at 55 miles or below, and when you have those abrupt bumps in the road, that's when I think the front suspension may bottom out a little bit. Again, the chance of that happening has been extremely rare in my case. So again, I've put about 19,000 miles in about a year, and the chance of that happening is extremely rare. So I'm actually very happy with the way the suspension is set up. I know there are some folks who say that the suspension is a little undersprung and underdamped. I think I do understand why it is said that way, but for my application, the suspension is just fine. I know some do go for a more costlier upgrade to actually go with a different system altogether. Well, if you have the dough, feel free to do it, but in my case I really don't see a need to. So that's really my take when it comes to the Honda suspension system. It's quite good. Another point I forgot to mention is with the front suspension here, there is absolutely no nosedive. So it gives you a lot of confidence when it comes to braking, which is again a feature of the new suspension system for the Goldwing. So yeah, that's really my take on the suspension system. A lot of pros, maybe one or two cons here and there, but overall I'm very happy with the way the suspension system is set up with the Goldwing. Again, if you guys like content like this, highly recommend you guys like and subscribe. Of course, if you have any more questions, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'll promise I'll respond. Thanks again for watching.